Gracious God, God of wisdom, please open our minds. God of love, please open our hearts so that we may receive your word. Amen. So our New Testament reading is from the Gospel of John, chapter 11, verses 1 through 45. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, his disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, so that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." After she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Martha in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews say, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and who had seen what Jesus did believed in him. Well, our first reading for today from the Old Testament was from the book of Ezekiel. And of all the books of the Bible, the book of the Ezekiel may very well be the strangest. It certainly contains some of the Bible's most arresting images, and it was written at an extraordinary time. One might say an extraordinarily awful time. Ezekiel lived in the 6th century BC in Babylon, where the political and religious leadership of Israel had been taken captive after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple and the conquest of the land by the Babylonians. It was a time when many Jews felt extremely forlorn, forced once again to live as strangers in a strange land, with little hope of ever seeing their homes again. No doubt many felt abandoned by God. The book records 6 visions given to Ezekiel, culminating in the promise of a new beginning for the nation of Israel, an end to their captivity, and the construction of a new temple where they could worship freely. It was a book of hope for hopeless times, but it's most notable for the spectacular images through which its message of hope is communicated. It begins with Ezekiel looking up to the sky one afternoon and seeing a vision of God riding in a chariot drawn by 4 creatures, each with 4 wings and 4 faces, those of a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. Spinning beside each creature was a wheel in the middle of a wheel with eyes all around the rim. Imagine looking up at the sky and witnessing such a breathtaking and probably more than a little terrifying sight. But almost as strange and even more chilling is the Valley of Dry Bones in Ezekiel 37, 1 through 14. One of our Old Testament lectionary reading for this morning. You may already be familiar with this passage, since it was the inspiration for the old spiritual Dem Bones, written by James Weldon Johnson and first recorded by the famous Meyer Jubilee Singers in 1928, though I'm pretty sure I first heard it sung by Herman Munster on the old TV show The Munsters. The lyrics take us through a grisly tour of our various bones and their connections, and in the original version, conclude each verse with a command to listen to Ezekiel's prophecy. Ezekiel cried, "Dem dry bones, now hear the word of the Lord. Toe bone connected to the foot bone connected to the heel bone." Remember that, right? Now hear the word of the Lord. Dim bones, gonna walk around. Hear the word of the Lord. So here's the scenario. In a vision, God takes Ezekiel down into a valley where on all sides he's surrounded by dead men's bleached bones. If there ever was a death valley, this is it. Ankle deep in skulls, Ezekiel is led around in this valley of bones, walking through the skeletal remains of a slain multitude, an open-air mass grave. From the way he paints this scene, it's clear how shaken he is to witness this aftermath to what must have been a horrible orgy of violence. This macabre vision is profoundly unnerving. But there's a powerful hope sounded in Ezekiel's vision of these dry bones. Dry, presumably, because they've been dead a very long time, long enough to grow bare, brittle, desiccated, not a speck of meat left on them. Ezekiel is instructed 3 times to prophesy to these remains. He's first told to command these dry bones to reassemble themselves. We hear the rattling sound of the bones as they come together once more, reconnecting at the joints, and then growing new sinews, flesh and skin. But they're not yet alive. And so, Ezekiel is instructed to prophesy a second time, to command the winds to restore breath to these bodies, these cadavers, and bring them back to life. It is an astounding vision, as though a video of someone taking his last breath and then his subsequent decay was being shown in reverse. But not just one person, an entire multitude of them. And finally, Ezekiel is instructed to prophesy to this restored multitude, who we're now told is the house of Israel, that God will return them to the land from which they have been exiled. It is, in short, a vision of resurrection. And that connects it to both this morning's gospel passage and to the season of Lent that we're now in, our time of preparation for Easter, when we celebrate the resurrection of Christ. The story of Lazarus from our gospel reading shared several things with Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, including this theme of resurrection. Both describe situations that any reasonable person would conclude was beyond hope. Our gospel passage opens on Lazarus, a friend of Jesus who is gravely ill. His sisters, Martha and Mary, send an urgent message to Jesus, believing that he can heal their brother if only he arrives in time. It's quite literally a matter of life or death. And yet, Jesus reacts to this message as though there's no urgency at all, dawdling for 2 days at his hideout beyond the Jordan River before departing for Bethany. And even then, he travels only during daylight hours rather than traveling day and night, as would someone in a hurry. When he finally arrives, Lazarus has been in the grave for 4 whole days. Now, according to Jewish belief at the time, the spirit of a person departed on the 3rd day after death. So Jesus shows up just as the finality of their brother's death was settling in for Martha and Mary. In fact, it almost looks as though Jesus deliberately timed his arrival to coincide with the moment when Martha and Mary's last hope had expired. The 4th day was when Lazarus' death had become real, really real for the sisters, when there was no longer any chance that their brother was, as Jesus had suggested, just sleeping. When Martha tells Jesus, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died," it's hard to tell whether she's declaring her faith in Jesus' ability to heal or reproaching him for neglecting his friend? Maybe a little of both. Others didn't mince words, however, wondering aloud why someone who could restore sight to the blind failed to save his friend, whom he supposedly loved. How many of us have had a similar experience, feeling forsaken, forlorn, even unloved, when our most urgent prayers go unanswered? But of course, we know that the story doesn't end there. Just as Ezekiel prophesied to the dry bones to reassemble themselves, grow new flesh, and draw the breath of life, so too Jesus calls to the dead Lazarus to come out of the tomb. And, just like the passage from Ezekiel, this scene too has more than a slight touch of the morbid and macabre. We're told there's a stench at the tomb. Of course, it reeked of rotting flesh after 4 days. And Lazarus exits his resting place wrapped like a mummy in his funeral cloth. The story makes no effort to disguise the grisly reality of death and decay. In Ezekiel's vision, the dry bones represented Israel's hope to return to the land of their fathers and mothers, a hope that for many Jews was as dead as those disassembled skeletons in that grim boneyard. But this vision, initially meant for an exiled people, can also speak to each of us individuals. No matter how dried up we may feel, no matter how dead and bereft of hope, we can still be restored. Similarly, in the story of Lazarus, when all hope has been lost, even as decomposition was setting in, life achieved a surprising victory over death that no one saw coming. But though these stories offer hope, they're also unsparing in their refusal to look away from the reality of death and decay. They depict not only new life and resurrection, but also the death that precedes it, the experience of being dried up, ripped apart, exposed to the cruel elements that strip us down to the bone and scatter our remains. It's a reminder that there can be no resurrection on Easter Sunday without the God-forsakenness of Good Friday. Where in our lives do we find a valley of dry bones? Wherever it may be, that is where the hope of resurrection lies.